Hi again, Andy here to carry on with some more SolidWorks instructions and tutorials. I'm going to pick up where I left off with the previous video 9, where we had started a revolved part and was going to show you some additional ways to create parts beyond what I did in the first set of 9 videos. So let's get started. So here we are with the part that I'd stopped with in the last video. It pretty much looks like a cylinder with a flare at the top. If there was a thread on the surface here, it might look like a screw. But it doesn't have that. It's just simply a cylinder with a couple of cones. Let's do a couple of things to make it more realistic, certainly, and also to show you some methods for continuing to increment and add to parts and create parts that are truly realistic. Let's carry on. So, first of all, you've already seen a lot of examples of using the sketch to modify a part. That's fair. When we look at this part, a couple of things kind of jump out at me. First of all, the edge up here looks pretty unrealistic. I don't know how to make such a sharp, infinitesimally tiny edge. And so there's multiple ways that we could actually make this represent perhaps what a real part might be like. One that you've seen already in a previous video was a chamfer. We could actually take that edge and we could select a chamfer distance. Let's say it's 0.5 millimeters. You could pick any old number you like, and I would select that edge. And a full preview would show us a chamfer like that. So that's made the part a little more dull, a little bit more realistic. Because frankly, in manufacturing anything, you're not going to get infinitely sharp edges, hopefully, or else you'll cut yourself on them. Excuse me. So that's one way to do it. If I go back to the chamfer, and I can edit anything by just re-clicking on it, and if I make that chamfer dimension, I can just change the number here and make it 2 millimeters. Well, that clearly looks different again, and it just happens that the angle that chamfered at is 45 degrees between the bisecting angle of the two faces. SolidWorks calculates that somehow. We could go into the chamfer and we could change this angle to something to make it whatever we want. So that's a possibility. That changes things. There's lots of ways we could play around with that. So there's the first way to make a realistic edge on this part. I'm going to suppress that for the moment. And let's try another way. Another way would be simply to go back to the sketch. And if I edit the sketch, as you already know how to do, I could come in here and I could draw a line like so. And the line is now crossing through. It's kind of at a funny angle, so I don't really want that necessarily. Maybe what I'd like to do is make it vertical. Now if I roll my mouse over that line, you'll see it shows up orange, and a few key things are indicated on it. One is in yellow, it's showing the midpoint of the line, that's the halfway point. And then there's a blue bar beside the mouse pointer that's kind of something. And that's kind of a short way of setting that line to be vertical. So if I just simply left click on the line at this point, it gives me a bunch of options for this. And one of them is I can make it vertical. So there, I select to make it vertical, and the line is now going to be up and down. Now the other thing I could do is I could dimension it. Now I could dimension it from this point to this line and dimension how much I'm going to cut off the edge. I could dimension on the diagonal or on the angled line. I could dimension it from the center of the body out to here. I don't really know what any of those dimensions are, and frankly, they're not really meaningful to me at this point. So what I'm going to do is carry on, and I'm going to trim this part. Now, I showed you the trim command before, and it's a really useful tool. So all I'm going to do is I've selected the trim up here on the left. I'm going to left click on my mouse and hold the button down, and then I'm just going to move the mouse around the parts I want to get rid of. Now in doing that, I'll just click accept. In doing that, the dimension of 20 that I'd set before has decided that it's going to be attached to this line. That's good. The fact that this line is vertical is still the case. That's good. But I could now move this any old way I like. And perhaps in dimensioning that, maybe it's that dimension that's important to me. I'm going to make that 1 millimeter. And so now I've trimmed that edge. And lo and behold, I've done the same thing as I had done with the chamfer command. Two different ways to get at the same result. Now if I go over the chamfer and I unsuppress it, it's going to have an error because the chamfer was expecting a sharp edge here. So by my doing it a slightly different way with the sketch, it makes the chamfer command not work anymore because the geometry the chamfer is based on is now quite different. So one but not both of those ways will work. Since I've already got the sketch changed, I'm just going to delete this chamfer. Delete that. There we go. And so I'll just stick with this part that I've done. Now there's other features of this part that aren't necessarily realistic. One of them, for instance, might be the fact that I've drawn that part with a really sharp corner here. Well, you've already seen filleting edges. I'm going to select this. I just click the fillet tool in Solid, and the filleting edge shows me how it might round that in the middle. I can change that dimension for the fillet. I can make it 0.1 millimeters, in which case the fillet is tiny. I can make it 50 millimeters, in which case it would be quite big. If I try to make it even bigger than that, it will still try to fillet it, in most cases. There's a lot of geometries that are more complicated than the simple one, where filleting a huge radius like that causes a problem. But I'm just going to settle on a 5 millimeter fillet. Nah, I don't like the look of that. I'm going to say 10, because 10 looked good. There. So now I've filleted that edge. This looks a bit more like something that might actually be a real part. I still have this sharp edge here. Yeah, might as well fillet that too. But I don't want a 10 millimeter fillet there. I'm going to make that 1 millimeter. And those little details of knocking off sharp edges and whatnot, they make the difference between a part that actually represents a real part or one that's a bad, not a bad, but a simplified geometry that is unrealistic when you try to use it to mimic a real product. So with that, I'm going to save this. And as I'd said when starting this out, there's always other ways to do this. Now, the way that I showed you cutting the edge off here, I could still do it one more way. And I'm going to leave the cut as it is, and I'm going to, instead of revolving something, I'm going to now, on this revolved body, because that was an earlier feature, an earlier operation, I'm going to do an extruded part. So I click extruded cut in this case. I'm going to select the top plane of this, and if I orient that, I'm going to draw something on this top plane and then cut it away from the actual part. So for the moment, I'm just going to orient the view from the top. So I'm looking down through the part, and I'm going to pick a circle. And if I roll my mouse over this boundary circle of the part, it lets me select the center of the circle. And if I move that out some point within the part, let's say, then I get a circle like so. And if I leave it at that, and I say there, I've just drawn my circle, and I select it, then the cut that SolidWorks now thinks I want to make is inside the circle. And as you can see, if I accept that, it will happily do it, and it'll complain that I've just made several bodies. And it's done this goofy thing where it actually cut the outer ring out, because it cut the inner closed region of the circle that I made. So that wasn't what I wanted. So if I go back to the definition of the cut, I can't do much with this. I could change how deeply it goes, but that wasn't what I'd intended. So I'm going to go back to the sketch that I created, and here I am editing the sketch. And what I need to do here is, if I want to cut the material away outside of the circle, I could do that a couple of ways. The way that I prefer to do it would be to draw another bounding circle outside of that. I know there's another way to do it, but I'm going to do it this way. So there, I've created another circle also on the center, and I'm just going to accept that. And now, interestingly, the cut worked just fine. Let's see why. I'm going to go edit the cut, and you'll see that the cut tool shows these three different regions of the part that I've just created. And it tries to define from the latest sketch what it thinks I want done, but I can be more clever than that. So right now it was actually pretty smart. It thought correctly that I wanted to get rid of this volume of material that's highlighted in pink when I mouse over it. I don't have to actually take its choice. I can select individual contours, and so if I do that, I'm going to click that region and that region, which are now purple, and now I'm telling SolidWorks I want to cut away those regions I've selected. If it was a more complicated geometry, I could select any number of different closed regions. If I click OK, it's done that. So that's yet another way to make the same part that I started off with that edit. Now that's showing you three different ways to do the same thing in this case. One was using a fillet, one was using an edit to the original sketch, and one was using another cut axially with the part. There's always, when you're modeling things in SolidWorks, multiple ways you could get at something. Some ways are easier to understand and to implement, some ways are harder, but it's worth knowing how many options you have in this. I'm going to leave it there for now. Thanks for watching, and we'll carry on with this in a little while.